We're going to do a medical one here. Salvete discipuli and salvete omnes. This is pretty pertinent right now because apparently Trump is dealing with something very similar. Not quite what's up on the board here behind me, but then I also wanted to go ahead and do a little bit of a tree and show all the, the cross connections that we can bring from, well, what is he dealing with right now? Or some Venus pooling of really basically what I had heard was that they were trying to indicate like, no, it's not a deep vein thrombosis, which can lead to a heart attack, by the way, an ST elevated myocardial infarction, if you will. ST elevation is what it shows on the EKG, and then ST elevated myo muscle cardia heart, because the heart is a muscle, and then ST elevated myocardial infarction. So in means into, and farcere in the Latin means basically to stuff into. And essentially what ends up happening when you have a heart attack is that arterial gets, stuffed up, right? And then there is no blood flow, which causes that loss of oxygen, loss of blood. You become, let's say, hypoxic, hypo, low, oxygen, low oxygen, emia, presence in the blood, hypoxemia, not a good thing. Now, with that being said, and my intro being a bunch of information that I hope didn't go right over your head, let's get on into this here real quickly because this can be a problem. And I don't know if you guys saw Trump's ankles, but those mofos were just as thick as his upper calves. So, a lot of the time when people deal with thrombosis and that kind of that pooling of blood, it's because they are sitting too long. If you sit too long, there's actually a case where um, uh, I would do a lot of these medical etymology lessons with my kids in secondary and also in my medical terminology class that I taught. But there was shout out Chubby Emu who did a video on this and broke it down as well. I like the way that he breaks down the medical pathologies and the blood panel and all that stuff. But this guy was basically, the story was he was really depressed. He went to one of those video game cafes and he just basically played for like somehow like 80 some 90 some hours straight. It just did not get up whatsoever. And what had happened is that basically a deep vein thrombosis formed in his leg, and as soon as he stood up, it dislodged from the leg, shot straight up right to his heart, caused an ST elevated myocardial infarction and or more so a cardiac arrest, aka the arresting of the cardiac, the heart, dead. So move your body. Movement is medicine. Just go on a walk. I do my hawker walks all the time, just for the good old noggin here. So with that being said, thrombocytopenia, well, actually, first off, thrombocyte. What's a thrombocyte? It's actually a cell that, well, creates the clotting of a cut. So let's say I had a little cut there. It raised, it gets hot to the touch with inflammation, right? Acute inflammation is important, but chronic inflammation is not. So when that inflammation occurs, it sends a signal to the body to throw a bunch of blood flow to that area because blood is going to carry all those nutrients that's going to help with the healing process. And then thrombocytes get mobilized because we got to stop it bleeding from some way. Now, if you have a propensity to bleed out, you might be hemophilic, right? Hemo, blood, philia, the affinity for. The affinity for bleeding out. There are cases where I remember one of my students was talking to me about in history. They fell out of a window, ended up like everybody thought they were fine, and then they ended up dying of internal bleeding because they were actually hemophilic, and they just kept on bleeding in, blood out, and nobody knew because they were bleeding out internally. So if you have your thrombocytes here, oddly enough, thrombocytopenia is almost the same thing as hemophilia. Thrombos would be the clot, cyto, cell, and or vessel. This is where you get phagocytes as well. Phagy means consumption. Phagocytes are consumption cells. They come up and basically debris. And then penia meaning poverty and or penalty. So the poverty of cells are the clotting cells, essentially. So you lack thereof, so you have the propensity to bleed out that way. So these two are very much correlated with one another. And I just wanted to go ahead and talk about penia here real quickly with osteopenia, because I don't know about y'all, but I know so many people that are on Ozempic right now, and Ozempic is starting to cause a lot of nutrient deficiencies with people, especially women and younger women. Younger women that are dealing with osteopenia, that's bad, because then that leads to osteoporosis, because poro means poros, osteo means bone, and then osis is the breaking down of porous bone. Penia, poverty of bone. That's the initial. And if you pull up a cross section of any bone, you see how there are little holes in the bone. And then when it starts to turn from osteopenia to osteoporosis, those holes get bigger and bigger and bigger, which makes your bone more brittle. And then you snappity snap. So if you learn something new, would really appreciate you co-finding me, because I think I just laid down a bunch of knowledge. Am I right? Hope you have a great day. Tempest says this, get right.